Welcome back, everybody. It's an Eagle Countdown. Great to be with you. I have more live people here in the Phyllis Schlafly Center, and so we're grateful. You don't have to lean in. It's fine. Don't lean too close. John Schlafly, of course, is back, and we're going to have a discussion with Catherine Engelbrecht. Catherine Engelbrecht is the founder of True the Vote, and has been for a couple months now. She briefed our Eagle leaders on a conference call. They've got a new video out, which we'll put up on social media. I think the full video is about 28 minutes. So there's a longer video explaining what's happening, what we're on the brink of, and then they'll use pieces of it, and they've got a lot of things going on. So first, let me make sure to give Catherine Engelbrecht all the hype I'm supposed to. True the Vote, which is a vote monitoring organization from Houston, Texas. She's also been early in the Tea Party Patriot movement, and she was maybe most famously, her organization targeted by the Obama administration. That's easy for me to say because it sounds like a nice phrase. It was a terrible ordeal which she went through, which maybe we'll talk about. But as we've said on Eagle Countdown, we gather to talk about these issues, and we're going to talk about what the Trump administration accomplished, why that matters. But also the title of our effort is Eagle Countdown: America on the Brink. On the brink of an election, on the brink of the left has said they're going to sow chaos. We're on the brink of an election where we have more mail-in ballots than we've ever had in places that have never done mail-in ballots. So first, Catherine Engelbrecht, tell us, you and John started to have a discussion about how you got into this, and there was a fire involved. Can you tell us this history? Welcome.
Sure. Thank you
for being with us.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. And John remembered, it's a little known part of our story, but when True the Vote first started, we began by getting a group of people to go and work at the polls because we knew that there was a shortage of volunteers. When we worked at the polls, we saw problems in the voter rolls, which led us to our first big research project. And that led to our questioning how registrations were coming into the rolls with so many errors. That led to a broader investigation, which led to our turning over evidence to the county. When we finally turned over all this evidence to the county, and it was clear at that point that tens of thousands of fraudulent registrations were being pushed into our rolls intentionally. There was a press conference called by the county, and the group that was outed at that time didn't take kindly to it. And 3 days later, they called their own press conference, and then that morning, all of the election equipment in Harris County was burnt to the ground in an enormous warehouse fire. It was 10,000 machines, $30 million in equipment. And then the group that called the press conference and their media cohorts tried to tie our organization into an arson investigation. That was my first foray into Marxist politics, and it's been a wild ride ever since.
John, is that how you recall it? Is there any questions you want to ask on this topic? Yeah.
Well, and what year was that, Catherine? If I may ask.
That was in 2010.
2010. Well, that was, of course, the Tea Party movement was just getting started then.
That's right.
And that was a key part of the beginning of the Tea Party movement. I remember that well.
All right.
But with all of the problems that you've dealt with for 10 years involving registrations, voting machines, and the other aspects of the process, now we have to worry about the mail. And that's a completely different but very, very serious issue about this year's election.
So let me say truethevote.org for our folks that are watching on all of our media channels. Truethevote.org is the website for Catherine's work. You can go there and find out more. And if you have questions on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, send them in now. We've got Catherine here for almost longer than a half an hour to talk about this. So your questions are welcome. So John says that, okay, now so you thought you had a hard job just working on election integrity, and now we have mail-in. What's your 50,000-foot view of the coming election, November 3rd?
This is engineered chaos. The fraud is being institutionalized, and we are going to see fraud, certainly, but process failure, intentional process failure, implosion, which is a favored tactic of the left to implode processes. That's going to play out in a way that I don't think any of us can fully anticipate. But I do think it's really important to come to terms with the fact that, at least in my view of things, we're in for a long road. November 3rd is not the end. This is There's a reason that they've already retained over 1,000 attorneys. There is a reason that they are so quick to look in the camera and talk about how they're going to remove Donald Trump from office under any condition. And one thing I've learned over the last 10 years is when they tell you who they are and when they tell you what they're going to do, believe them.
Okay, so and let me go back for our Eagle Countdown folks that have been listening. We ask all of our guests 2 questions, but I'm going to put aside the first question, what's your favorite Trump-Pence promise kept, till later. We'll go back to it, because the second one is, what can people do? I mean, you paint this picture now of, what'd you call it, engineered
chaos.
No, engineered failure, engineered some sort of even better than chaos.
Oh, the institutionalized.
Yes.
The fraud's been institutionalized.
So what can people do? I mean, we're sitting back and we're saying, what can we, we see it coming. Some of us are poll workers and all, but what can they do? What can we expect? What should we be doing?
Well, as dire as some of my comments are, I am incredibly optimistic as we see people around the country continue to wake up and recognize that we all have a role to play, that this year voting is not enough. This year serving in elections is essential. Being aware of the many ways that you can serve, and then just getting involved. So what people can do right now, first of all, is choose in. Do not anticipate, or let me say that differently, you shouldn't anticipate just being at home after you voted and watching the results roll in and feel like you've done your job. This year you have to do more than vote. You can call your county, and if you go to our website, we have all the, if you go to our website, we have a section called Call Your County.
TrueTheVote.org.
TrueTheVote.org. You can check out Call Your County, type in your county name, or select it from a drop-down. We'll give you all the information about who to call for your local election process, how you can serve. There's applications online to get plugged in. You can work at the county level, and every state runs this a little bit differently, but you can work as a poll worker, an election judge, mail-in ballot observer, mail-in ballot review board. There's all kinds of positions. And then if you call the county and they say, no room in the inn, we're full, then immediately pivot to call your party or the candidate of your choice and get plugged into their election integrity process. And if they don't have one, start one. We need all hands on deck this cycle.
I have this idea that we have body cams. Everybody wants body cams for cops. What can we have? I know it's state by state, but can our jurisdictions have stream some of these things live? So at least if we see Al Franken's votes emerge out of the trunk of a car in 2010, was that 2010, John? Was that 2010, I think, right?
I think it was 2008.
Oh, was it 2008?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right, it was. If we see that, we at least know what it's... But is there any of that transparency? Will anyone stream some of this live?
I know that some of the mail Dropbox facilities or locations are being streamed. Very few. It should be more. Typically, anything that happens inside of the poll, you aren't supposed to bring cameras in. Although we see the press every year come in and watch the politicians vote.
Right.
But in any event, we're having to now anticipate things that we've never had to think about before. I mean, the idea of our elections is built upon this supposition of honor, that we shouldn't have to think about all the body cams, for crying out loud, to follow people, but that's where we are, because we've been burned so many times in the past, and this is the battle royale. Yeah.
John, what you've been writing, John Schlafly, a lot of our Eagle Countdown participants will know, writes a weekly column, the Phyllis Schlafly Report, continuing Phyllis's work, and you've written about this, John, on Mailin. What's your sense? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, Ed, many of our listeners, I'm sure, have volunteered at the polls on Election Day and are familiar with that process. And the people who are poll workers, you're accustomed to the fact that, while we assume everyone's honest, there need to be at least two pairs of eyes on everything that happens, and 2 signatures that attest to every paper that's turned in. Now, that's for people who vote on Election Day. But what about all of these mail ballots, and who's going to supervise these mountain of envelopes that are going to arrive at the polling place, and whether they arrive on time, whether they are postmarked, whether the signatures match, and all of those details. And there's 20 to 50 times as many mail-in ballots, people are saying, than we have ever had before. And that's assuming the post office delivers them. Now, I really don't feel the post office should be even part of the process, because the United States Postal Service, for all of its merits, and to give credit where credit is due, but they are not built to conduct an election. They cannot conduct an election. They simply are not accurate enough. They do not deliver the mail accurately enough within a degree of tolerance for a close election.
Before we get to that, back to the question: who counts the mail-in? Who's going to count the mail-in ballots? How are they going to be counted? What are we going to? What was the county in Florida where they were doing hanging chads up there? I mean, they're going to have hanging chads with mail-in. They're going to have signatures, though, I suppose, right? You have to supposedly compare.
Absolutely.
Who's going to do that?
Well, and great question. Every state's going to handle it differently, and counties within the states are going to handle it differently. This is setting up to be a litigation feeding frenzy. And it's intentional. You can think about it.
John's a lawyer, so don't offend. John gets offended if people are bad on lawyers, so be careful.
Well, this has been, and you will appreciate the craftiness of it all. There are the same groups that for the last 8 months have been suing to remove signature standards, suing to create confusion around postmark standards. Those same groups were the groups pre-2020 that were suing states to prevent them from cleaning their voter rolls, and that would say if you took off names, that somehow that was leading to voter suppression. So what we've now found ourselves with is a national registry, state by state, that is riddled with errors. All those now going out, all of these bad addresses going out in mail form, coming back in. Who's going to be reviewing it when they get there? You have some counties that they handle this with their own employees. You have some counties that outsource it. You have some counties that rely upon volunteers. But no county is prepared for the 20 to 50 times number. You can't operationalize something like that at scale, beta, the first time, and expect that this. Look at what has happened with the primaries. Already in the primaries, we've seen over 1 million votes be tossed. But it hasn't seemed to have anybody, tap on the brakes.
I think I read that 5 states have done mail-in before. To this time.
Or all mail-in.
5 states were all mail-in.
Right.
But all right, but they have experience of
That's
that.
right.
But
That's
the
right.
other states are just not prepared to
That's right.
suddenly go to all mail-in.
Now, we get a
That's
question
right.
from our Eagle Countdown viewers. Someone on Facebook said, and you sort of touched on it, because this happens all the time. It happened when I was chairman of the Board of Elections. As soon as you say, I want to make sure that the voter rolls are correct, they yell voter suppression. So the question, how do you respond to claims of voter suppression? That's from our Facebook listener, viewer.
It's really a very simple calculus. We should be confirming identity, residency, and citizenship of every person registered. We actually have the data and technology to do that in real time. Now, that's a conversation for a different day. But where we are now, there should be standards. And there should be standards not only for the thresholds of accuracy of the data, but there should be standards for the scheduled maintaining of that data. Where we find ourselves today is, sadly, with all of the weaknesses of our process on full display. And one of them is a standard for cleaning the rolls, which leaves them open to litigation, because you don't have a prescribed process, so you end up with interpretations that can be used for fodder for lawsuits. It's a mess.
Why? I think I know the answer. Maybe John, I think you've written on this. Why? Oh, first I got another question from Facebook. Can teens work at polls? Depends on the state.
In most states, you can be 16 years old and work.
Okay.
Or there's certain things you can work in certain capacities at 16, and then in others at 18. But
by the time you're 18, if you're a voter, if you're a registered voter, you can do anything.
Right.
But now I started to ask, why can't there be one standard? I hate to sound like I'm for more federal intrusion, but why can't, at least when it comes to, let me say it like this way, this will get John fired up. Why didn't the Republican House and Senate with President Trump pass a federal voter ID? Couldn't they have?
Well, as you've dealt with the Congress, the House of Representatives,
could they have passed that though? Could it have been? What federal protection could we demand?
Well, the Constitution deals with elections, and it's a kind of a complex and subtle division of authority between federal and state. Under the Constitution, the states determine who is eligible to vote. And namely, it's the people who are eligible to vote for the lower house of the state House of Representatives. But whereas the federal government can set time, place, and manner, but then unless Congress can also make other provisions, but the courts, unfortunately, too many of them, both federal and state courts, have gotten involved, and there have been decisions just in the last few weeks in which judges have said that they've extended the deadlines by which the ballots have to be turned in, and it's shaping up to be a mess on election day. Because there's so many judgment calls,
Right.
But one thing should be a hard and fast rule, and that is a mail ballot should be postmarked before election day in order to count. Now, the trouble with that is much mail doesn't get a postmark anymore. The post office has quit postmarking a great deal of mail. Sometimes there's a smudge on it, and you can't tell what the number is. And the local officials, if they're conscientious, would toss those ballots out and say they cannot be accepted if there's not a legible postmark. But still, judges have said, well, all right, but if they're postmarked on election day, they might not arrive until 3, 5, or even in some cases a week or more later. And that's a bad situation, because the states have said that the ballots have to arrive by election day, but judges have said, no, we're going to extend that.
All right, I'm getting lots of questions in here about things. One is, how many states have an active election integrity program? You don't have to give it exactly. It's probably, but are states that do it, or is it locally jurisdictions?
Another great question. You've got some smart listeners. Not many, and quickly I will try to explain why. In the early 80s, there was a lawsuit between the Republicans and the Democrats, and it resulted in something called the New Jersey Consent Decree.
Yeah.
And in the New Jersey Consent Decree, the Republican Party agreed to not spend any dollars in ballot security, and that stayed in place until 2017. Now, although that was a federal consent decree or a national consent decree and wouldn't have prevented the states, it just led to a place where states just didn't set up their own processes. True the Vote is the only pro-liberty organization focused on solely election integrity in this way, but mercy knows there needs to be more.
About truethevote.org, I've said, and I had you on my radio program to talk about it, I said, I think of 3 steps. One is get the day off of work, because a lot of people have to plan ahead. You have to now most places I've checked a little bit, you can get trained virtually. You may have to go into the county, but get the day off of work, number one. Number 2 is contact your county. Go to truethevote.org and see what county drop down. Contact your county or municipality or your party if you can't get through there.
Right.
And number 3 is get your mindset around. You've got to be, I call it eyes inside. You've got to be aware of what's going on and be ready to stand up for this. More questions. This is easy, but important to say over and over. What's the difference between mail-in ballots and absentee ballots?
Great. Another great question. So absentee ballots, we're playing with definitions in this cycle as well, but historically what it's meant is that absentee is meant to imply that you are not going to be present and able to vote in person. Therefore, there are requirements associated with requesting an absentee. I'm going to be absent on election day, and either that's because you are going to be out of your county, out of your state, you're infirm, you have a prescribed disability, or you're of an age.
Right.
That's typically what's required in most states. Where mail-in is just mass mail going out to you indiscriminately without reason.
Right, just mailed out.
Without
How many
cause.
states allow mailing ballots to people who don't request them? Do you know the number?
That's, as John said, that's changing on a daily basis. Montana's most recent ad, last 3 weeks ago, the governor by fiat decided that whole state could be mail-in. Surprise.
Well, there
He's running for Senate.
A number of states that are sending out the application for the mail-in ballot.
That's right.
Now, that's not so bad, because a real live human person has to receive that mail and fill out the form, which can be a little complicated.
That's better. That's right.
And in fact, but what we learned a few weeks ago is that county clerks in Iowa, since the form was kind of complicated to fill out, they were helpfully filling out the form for the voter. They called
So
that
helpful.
pre-populating the form. And then, but of course, that meant that if somebody got that application form, it might not be the voter, it could be somebody else who could then cast that ballot. Well, fortunately, judges in Iowa ruled that no, that's not allowed, that's not what the law provides, and those applications had to be done over.
Catherine, what is your experience, the organization of success or failure when you go to the courts? I mean, if you go to state courts in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was taken over by Democrat candidates a few years ago, again, right? And they've been ruling on these things. Federal courts, are they better? Is that the hope? Is that a hope that you'll get relief from all these Trump appointees in the federal courts or others? What's your feeling?
This year, we have been involved in legal battles in New Mexico, Nevada, Virginia, Michigan, and Montana. Right now, Michigan and Montana are ongoing. I will tell you, it's been a rough road because the timeline is so compressed and you're having to sort of change your strategy in play. The left has architected this season for a very long time. And there are some 80 lawsuits that in the last 8 months have been filed to change laws and standards. So it's been a challenge. And we're at a point now where we really need to look November 3rd and beyond, because I believe we're going to be awash in lawsuits that are going to be made possible by all the vagaries that we're describing, all of the confusion.
The 80 lawsuits by the left or the Democrats, are they actually done by the Democrat Party, or are they these front groups?
It's a combination, but they seem to be primarily orchestrated by Mark Elias, who was actually cut his teeth on the Al Franken Norm Coleman race. And that's where he, got his claim to fame.
Very successful if you're him.
If you're Mark Elias in that capacity. Went on to become Hillary Clinton's attorney. Did a lot of damage in the states in 2016, and came back with a vengeance now.
So back to what people can do. I know I asked you earlier. People need to volunteer in their states. Is it the parties that could seek legal, remedies? Is it the Department of Justice that should be involved? Who can be involved? And let me say it differently. If I announced that there was a plan that was going to disenfranchise, pick a hyphenated American group, African American voters, the Department of Justice would rush in and have observers and have participation. We have now a promise of election chaos. Who can we be asking to help us besides True the Vote and ourselves?
Sure.
What entities could do it?
We should definitely be asking the Department of Justice, and the very thing you've just described, a condition of disparate impact, is a very real and actionable thing that we need to get ahead of, because the frustrating play that we're in the midst of is that the powers that set up this calamity are the same ones that are now going to claim how unfair it is on the other side of the election. They caused it, and now with a straight face, they're going to say, this was so unfair. We need to be gaming this out. But yes, the Department of Justice, and then past that, and John can speak to it, I'm sure, more eloquently, but it depends upon the standing.
I wouldn't get carried away with that kind of talk, but go ahead.
True the Vote's always, our position is always representing the voters. So where we claim our standing is on behalf of the voters, and candidates and parties have different constitutional
Before
provisions.
We see if John's got eloquence left, why is it that the politicians don't get madder? If you told me and I was an elected official and I said, watch what they did in 2018 by ballot harvesting in California, and over the course of 5 days after the election, they harvest the ballot, counted them, and switched 3 or 4 races out of it. Maybe I'm overstating it. Whatever. Let's just say 1. Why?
I think it was 5.
Was it 5? Most politicians, elected officials, care first and foremost about being reelected, no matter what else they say. And why don't they understand what this looming threat is? What's your experience?
The House Republican leader he came pretty close to losing his seat too. You'd think he would care about it, and he might have done something. I'm talking about Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah. No, I know. California, they rolled his caucus went from whatever it was down by 5, as you point out, and maybe more. But what I don't understand is the psychology of the players. You know, and I've said the same thing to the Trump campaign and the Trump White House. Is you know, I don't think he'd mind me saying, but General Flynn, Mike Flynn, about a week ago, he said, you know, what we see coming, stuff you've said, you know, 1,000 lawyers. Getting a system ready, and then the street protests, riots, the threats of it. It's all standard operating for a sort of campaign against. And yet here we are, where the United States Senate is controlled by Republicans. You don't hear a word about it. What's wrong here, John? What are we missing?
Well, if you know, what's looming apparently is a situation where days and possibly even weeks after the election, we might not know who won key battleground states, which are very close. And that is a recipe for possibly civil disorder, apparently. And it's something to be concerned about.
Catherine, if you had to pick the top 10 worst places where you fear the most trouble, are they the natural ones that the media covers as swing states, you know, Pennsylvania, or are there certain ones that over this decade you've seen in particular they've got? Oh, by the way, I know. Answer that first, and I've got a question about George Soros. But are there places where you'd say are the likely worst actors coming?
I mean, this is a multi-act play here. So you have the typical battleground states. Then you look at it through a different filter, where the strategy would suggest it's not about the votes, it's about crashing the elections and binding those electors from being awarded to the Electoral College. So what states could you do that in, and how could you do that? What kind of confusion could you cause to prevent the election from being decided by December 8th so that electors could be cast?
Let's pause and say that I was going to ask it to go through that. The November 3rd is the election. December 8th, under the Constitution, the Electoral College is required to vote, cast their votes, right?
Well, on December the 8th, the votes have to be sealed by the state.
Okay.
And then in December, the Electoral College meets, and by January 20th, they have to have identified which of the candidates.
If someone gets a majority, of the majority of the electoral votes, right?
The Constitution says that the president needs an absolute majority of the electoral votes. It's not enough just to have the most votes. So if there are states that have not determined who won,
I see.
You know, then there is an unresolved question. Well, is that state's electoral vote included in the denominator or not?
So your point, if they crash Texas and it was going to go to Trump and it's not, you can't get to an absolute majority, then you've got a path to this chaos.
Right.
George Soros got a lot of attention recently because in places like St. Louis, where I'm from, he helped elect a prosecutor who's just is like further to the left.
Two of them.
Well, that's right. One in St. Louis City and County. You're right, and in Philadelphia. You know. But before that, George Soros had this Secretary of State project where he funded. Candidates helped fund his organizations like Robin Carnahan in Missouri and others. How bad is that problem of the Secretary of State? So, I mean, when you look out there, are you saying we don't just have some bureaucrat as the Secretary of State, the highest election authority of each state, we have these ideologues?
Absolutely. He's been bringing them in waves. Then you take the Secretary of State positioning, which he's been very clear in saying that it's in case of a photo finish presidential that they put these people in place on their behalf. They've also been playing down ballot to the DAs, and now you have the new heir apparent, Mark Zuckerberg, investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the local election staff. We are watching it play out before our eyes, and we need to wake up.
By the way, we've got somebody on Facebook said, I just helped my friend register to vote over the phone while watching, so +1 in Missouri. And then Joyce, one of our great leaders, Joyce said, can Catherine comment on early voting? I think she has. She's not a big fan of it. But I think the bigger insight for people to hear, it doesn't matter if you're in Texas where you think it's safe or if you're in, pick a state where it's solidly Idaho. If the goal is to cause the system to crash, to cause more chaos, that's the path. So truethevote.org, you can find out, click down. Catherine, I don't want to let time slide. We're amazing how fast it's going. I do want to ask you the question I ask every guest. If you had to look at the Trump administration, one Trump promise that he kept. Maybe it does to do with elections, maybe it doesn't. But he ran for office. He had a lot of promises. We put together a lot of his promises kept that he's done, because we remind people it's not only about these two candidates, it's about what one candidate did in office and what the other one maybe didn't. But do you have a favorite Trump promise kept that you care about?
I have many, but my favorite is the president's unwavering resilience in fighting the deep state and the swamp. And I don't know that truer words have been spoken than to say that there is a swamp that you have to wade through and drain in order to set things straight. And that is a job of scale that just boggles the mind. Yeah. And he has been a warrior.
Well, and I guess you maybe you should. I mean, I'm a little too flip. You should maybe form like a special society, like you and Carter Page got targeted, and Papadopoulos and Mike Flynn. You could have like a meetings of that. I mean, it's really funny for me. I shouldn't be, but it is horrendous to hear ordinary citizens. You were one of the ones that. Probably you're one of the ones that survived and thrived, because lots of others got squashed and we never heard their story. They
count on our silence. They count on us not standing up. And that's why, as dire as some of the predictions that we're talking about here may seem, the power of the people cannot be overstated. We together rising up can defeat all of this. We just have to choose to do it.
I was going to ask you to inspire us at the end, but you just did. But I want to grab this. The video you produced is very good, very meaty. Tell our viewers what it is. It's at truethevote.org. You can get it. We'll also post it up. But tell us what this is for this moment, because it helps as we're counting down to November 3rd. It clarifies. But walk us through.
Sure.
This.
Well, what we decided to do was shoot a full video that described the series of steps that have gotten us here, and more importantly than anything, I think, say the name, label the enemy. They are revolutionary Marxists. We have to get comfortable in naming the enemy. This is not by accident. History shows what happens when these insurrections take hold, and if they're not beat back, where it lands, where it heads. We have to be real with ourselves. There is a clear and present danger on home soil, and we have to stop it. And that's what we wanted to film and show. It's good film. John, any last comments for Catherine?
Well, registration, Catherine, you began talking about registration, but I guess the registration books usually close 28, 30 days before the election. And from that point, we have to deal with the situation that we face, and where the errors in registration. Someone shows up to vote, they can vote anyway with a provisional ballot, and I'm sure there will be tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of provisional ballots, and that's another recipe for chaos that's weighing down the system this year. Absolutely.
Well, I guess so. My takeaways, Catherine Engelbrecht, truethevote.org. But one is, I'm going to add one. You said everybody's got to decide. Voting's not enough this time. And it's good that people, Andrew said he's registering a friend. That's good. But people need to be poll workers, watchers. Maybe they need to support poll workers and watchers. Maybe you watch the kids while your husband or wife goes, whatever it is. We've got to be more active in the system. I think we probably got to be ready to be active after, when there are questions about recounts and counting. There'll be volunteers that are going to say on November 4th, can you count? And we're going to have to get people ready. So truethevote.org. The other thing, though, I think we should encourage is get people, including your congressmen and senators, to watch the video of Catherine's and pay attention to this, because some of these leaders, or your local leaders, they need to step up and understand what's at stake. And again, most congressmen, my experience, candidates, they think they've got their race figured out. Right. They got the little world they're in. They're thinking, well, if the Electoral College is a problem, I'm just trying to go in my race.
Right. This is heavy stuff. It's a lot.
It's a lot. So you challenge people to get involved more broadly, or get their elected officials and folks involved.
Absolutely. And we're unstoppable if we can do that.
All right. Catherine Engelbrecht, thank you. Thanks for coming in to be with us. And we'll get that video of hers up on our website, but also in social media, so you'll see it, and truethevote.org. And we'll come back to this topic. And remember, if you're watching the Eagle Countdown right now live, we're doing this in a way that we can use these pieces, 30 minutes together, to put them up on social media. So if you were interested in what you saw, if you wanted to pass it on to someone else, we'll have that ability in the next day or couple days. As I say that, Ryan is ready to kill me, the guy that does all our technical stuff. But we'll get it up so that we can get this to you so you can use it for other people. And also, don't forget, if you have questions or comments, if they're after Catherine's gone, send them to us anyway, info@phyllisschlafly.com. We'll pass them on, or we'll answer when we can. And I think that's all. Anything else, John?
All right.
Okay, good. All right, we're going to